We're going to jump right in here, part 2 with TBS and his explanation of our witnesses to Christ and the resurrection.
There's only 4 Gospels in the Bible: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not 12. So the 12 liars defense you gave doesn't really work because we don't have 12 people making this claim. We've never met these 12 people. We've never talked to eyewitnesses. But we have 4 of these books that are essentially claiming that 12 people would make this claim. And even then, only 2 of the 4 people to whom these Gospels are attributed would have even been eyewitnesses. So instead, going back to our little scenario here, let's just say that 4 of our friends came up to us and simply told us that there were 12 eyewitnesses that we unfortunately don't ever get to meet. Well, that's not really an eyewitness account anymore, is it? But that...
Okay, that's true. The premise of the situation is not that, though. I know that Christian may have made some wrong claims. I'm not sure. I didn't hear the other side of this debate. But I do know this. There was more than just 4 documents written in the New Testament about Jesus. Yeah. There was a guy named the Apostle Paul who also saw Christ resurrect from the dead. Now you can just say, well, that's one guy. He does say he saw him. He's one man. That's it. We have his documents. We haven't met him. No, we haven't met him. But he did talk to the 12 people. He talked to Peter, Jesus' #1 disciple. Paul talked to James, Jesus' brother. He talked to a whole host of Christians all in that area. He was writing in the 50s, 20 years after Jesus had died. And we have a tradition in 1 Corinthians 15, I'll put that up there in footnotes, where he is quoting a tradition that he received from the Jerusalem church, where it talks about how Jesus appeared to Peter, to the 12, to 500 people. So this isn't just 12 people, this is 500 people. To James, Jesus' brother, to all the other apostles, and then to Paul. So now it switches from being just 12 best friends, or now 4 best friends, to one guy saying about hundreds of people seeing him. Now, is Paul lying? It is a little distant. I mean, we don't get to talk to the 500 people. But this is Gert Lutman. Okay? He's an atheist. Doesn't believe in Christianity. He admits that hundreds of people saw Jesus alive from the dead. Now, that they perceived that Jesus was alive from the dead. He admits that. So we have historical evidence that hundreds of people. Now that, and he has good reason for that. It's very unlikely that Paul made that up. I could give you all the historical reasons for why it's very unlikely. Now, he's an atheist. He sees it. Now, he studied the field. TBS hasn't. And the people he's quoted on Wikipedia, probably Bart Ehrman and a lot of people. Bart Ehrman is a lower criticisms expert. Now, he does know a lot about church history, but Bart Ehrman, that's not his specific field. His specific field is lower criticisms, which is manuscripts, which we'll get into that when you go in and you half-truth what Bart Ehrman says about lower criticisms later on. And you get into wild stuff there at the end with, and Bart Ehrman is partly to blame for some of that. But he's an atheist. Gert Lutman. Almost every scholar that I've read does acknowledge that hundreds of people saw Jesus alive from the dead. Now, what they say, they don't think that Jesus physically rose from the dead. Even liberal scholars who don't believe in the supernatural, what they believe is that they saw Jesus in ecstatic visions, ecstatic visionary encounters. Like they parallel it to Paul, like Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan. So we have access through Paul to other people. Now, sure, that's not directly from Peter, but in the book of Acts, we have Peter's sermons that are written in a different style than Luke's usual style in his gospel in Acts. So many scholars, you can see it in the Greek, that he's quoting from earlier traditions. Okay? So the whole premise that we only have 4 best friends witnessing to this is faulty. We have 27 documents in the New Testament, and even outside Clement is another one, and Ignatius, who were in touch with the apostles, that talk about this. We have hundreds of people that is almost historically certain that they had encounters with Jesus resurrected, who saw his ministry, who saw his life. He's going to talk later about only 4 people that saw this, and I can't even remember a movie that I watched, a line from a movie. This wasn't one person. This was a community. A whole community heard Jesus' teachings, and they saw his ministry. It was a community. And yes, we live in a visual society today. Okay? We live in a visual society. That society was oral. Oral tradition was their life, and you're right, only 10% of the population was literate. So they passed things on orally. So they had an extraordinary memory of hearing things and remembering them orally. So when you talk about 30 years from the source, that is nothing. You're still in the first generation. Mark is still in the first generation. He was there to talk to eyewitnesses. Okay, so let's keep going on here.
That's the least of our problems. The canonical Gospels, they weren't written during Jesus' ministry. The earliest one of them was written 30 years later. So let's throw in a twist. Let's say that our 4 friends are just now telling us about this Jesus guy, but it would have happened over 30 years ago.
Paul's writing in the 50s, quoting tradition that goes back to the 30s. Gert Lüdemann, again, atheist. I'm trying to bring him out. And he's not the only one. And there's tons of evidence for this. Okay? The early church, he even admits, 6 months after the crucifixion of Jesus, that creed in 1 Corinthians 15 was probably formulated. And that there was probably an ecstatic group vision of hundreds of people in Jerusalem with that encounter, the 500, the meeting of the 500. So the whole premise here that we're hearing this 40 years after and we're not in touch with eyewitnesses, it's completely fake, false. Okay, we're going to stop here. We'll keep on going.